All right, we're going to run through our soldering practice project here. So everybody's going to get their kit. All right, we need to make sure that we understand how to put all the components in correctly, and make sure that we follow all the step-by-step directions that are in the pamphlet here as we go through. All right, so making sure that you open it up, read, knowing the color codes for the resistors, choosing the right component, make sure we're going step by step as we go through and solder. I'm just going to show you some quick soldering pieces. I'm not going to show you me soldering the entire thing. All right, so we're going to take our board, all right, and you need to find and follow the directions. All right, we're going to solder 4 of the 100 ohm resistors into R6, R7, R8, and R9 right here on the board, and you can kind of see what we're going to solder to on the back. So ideally, your best bet is to make sure that you take the resistor, all right, and bend it so that it's going to fit into the board correctly. All right, and let's just start with R6. So you're going to put it through as such. Make sure that it's completely flush to the board. All right, and then you're going to have the pins kind of on the back. Now sometimes it's easier with the resistors if you bend them flat before you solder so that you don't lose out on them. So when you bend them flat, that means that it's not going to fall out the other side when you're soldering. All right, so you want to make sure that when you're soldering, you have it on a flat surface as well. All right, so what you're going to want to do is you're going to grab your piece of solder, make sure your solder tip is clean, all right, and then get a good angle as you get in, and you're just going to push the solder down onto the solder iron, okay, and then onto the spot. There's a little pad down there, and that's really all that you're going to drip it onto. So I'm going to heat up the wire just a little bit, set it on, come off, and then you clean your solder iron off. And make sure you don't touch these right away, all right? But as you can kind of see, I know the video might have gone dim there, but you can see, all right, how the solder looks on there. So up close, you can see where the solder is, okay, on the pad, and it's sitting right there and right there. You're going to do the same for the other 3 resistors, R7, R8, and R9, that are all going to go right here. So make sure, put the resistor through so it flush, and then at the end, we're going to clip the wires off so they aren't protruding. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and finish up the last 2 resistors. I just did one here in a second, but so you can kind of see close up what's going on here as we're soldering. All right, doesn't need to be a lot of solder, just going right down on there. Just quick and simple, all right? Drip it right on. Helping hands help sometimes on some of these. All right, and get it right on there and you're good. Make sure you keep cleaning off the tip of your solder iron after you solder each and every time. So make sure that we clean up all the ends. So there's the first 4 resistors, and remember, resistors are not polarized. It doesn't matter which direction they go. And then make sure that we're clipping all the ends off. So remember, I don't want this one to be the most beautiful looking one. I'm just getting through this to show you the basics of soldering. You're going to take your time when you do the chassis pieces and things like that. And make sure that we clip all the parts nice and flush. There might be a few more on here that need to be trimmed. All right, but you can just kind of take a look, and that's pretty much how easy and quick it is to solder something together. So make sure when you are on step 3, all right, there's a difference between a 1/2 watt and a 1/4 watt resistor. So what we've been putting in, and most of them are the 1/4 watt resistors. All right, that's this little guy right here. All right, these are the 1/2 watt. Notice the larger physical size of the resistor. So make sure you pay attention to where the 1/2 watt goes in versus where all the 1/4 watt resistors go in when we're soldering. It's okay on these two resistors right here, the circles, okay? The pad connects to both of them, so it's okay if you solder both of these together and create a solder bridge, because those are connected in series. So just make sure that it's a nice clean solder droplet that you get on there. All right, but piece of cake, I got all the resistors done now. We'll clean it up and clip off all the excess. Okay, next is the capacitor, okay, the 1 microfarad capacitor. It's polarized, so you need to make sure that when you're looking on the board here, the plus side and the minus side. The plus side is the longer leg, so the longer leg needs to go into the plus, right, and it's gonna sit flush on the board as such. Once you have it in flush, bend your pins, okay, so that it'll stay flat while you solder it. All right, next is our little 0.01 microfarad capacitor. All right, so we're going to take that, and this one is not polarized. This one is going to go where C2 is. It doesn't matter which way you put this one. Only the electrolytic capacitor was the one that looks like Advil, ibuprofen, okay, is not. So go ahead and make sure that it's down in there, and just like with all the other elements, all right, make sure that you bend the wires back so that it doesn't fall out while you're trying to solder it, all right, and get it pushed through as much as you can. Double check that you got it. It's okay if it leans to one side or another like this. It doesn't have to sit right in the middle. We want the components and all the wires to sit flush mount when we do this, all right? So then once you got this guy on here, all right, just get it, solder iron, a little bit of solder going on. Make sure we get it on the pad and it drips down on, all right? You can always touch it up if you need to as well. All right, so make sure when we use the transistor, this is the transistor that you put it onto the board correctly. The board is nicely printed for you to put it on correctly. So see how there's a flat side on the board of the transistor, and then the piece of the cylinder that arcs around the back. Match your flat side of your transistor, all right, to exactly how it looks on the board. Okay, so it's going to go in just like such. Okay, and you might have to separate them, but be very careful with the transistor. These guys are sensitive when you put them in, and the legs tend to break, and they're very, very delicate. So be very careful when you're putting the transistor in. Sometimes you have to spread the legs apart enough to get all three in. All right, get this one as flush as you can. Don't over force it when you do that, just because you could cause the pins to break when you're putting it in like that. All right, so you should kind of sit about that height. Try to make sure that you don't create any solder bridges when you solder the transistor on. All right, and try not to hold the heat on it too long, because the transistor could fry. So just be careful when you're doing those sort of things. All right, and then we're going to go ahead and clip those off. It's okay to bend them a little so it doesn't fall out while you're soldering. All right, so we got to talk about both diodes here. All right, we have the Zener diode. It's the one with the orange stripe, and we have your regular diode. All right, the difference between the Zener diode and the regular diode is diode only allows current in one direction. The Zener diode allows current to flow in the opposite direction, sometimes just based on what the different voltage is, okay? So make sure that the line goes in the correct direction, all right? So the line on the board, see where the diodes go in D1 and D2. Put the right diode in the correct location based on the directions. But see how there's a line there, Your diode also has a line, okay? You may not see it well in the video, but there's a line on the end of your diode. You'll see it. Make sure that it matches up when you solder these in. All right, so make sure we're gonna put the diodes in next, so you can see, the LEDs, light emitting diodes. All right, those are gonna go right here. They are polarized. Notice that there's a plus on each one of these on the board. All right, so the long end of your LED has to go into the plus end when you slide these through. Slide them all the way through, okay? And then once again, bend the legs before you solder so they don't solder or fall out while you're trying to solder. All right, so you can bend the legs and solder. So that's a good technique of being able to get those in there without them falling out when you're soldering them. All right, last thing we're going to put in before we pop the chips in is the chassis. The chips go in last. They're solid on top. The chassis, you can see all the way through the chassis. It's literally to hold the chip in place so that you solder this in first so that you don't damage the chip when you solder. All right, so you must put all the chassis in first before you literally put the chips in. All right, so I'll show you how to do that here in a second. All right, so the best way to actually put the chassis in so that these pins don't fall out is to tape it. Just get some painter's tape or some Scotch tape if you got it, and make sure that you push them all the way through. Okay, push them all the way through so that this doesn't slide out when you solder these in. Make sure when you solder these that you don't create any joints that shouldn't be happening along here. So just a little bit of solder on each one of these holes. Don't gloop them together. They barely, just a little bit of solder, enough to close it, and make sure the chassis doesn't fall out. But when you see it, make sure that the pins, all right, are protruding out like you can see in the video, okay? So make sure you do it that way. So you're gonna do that for all three chassis. All right, so sometimes you get too much solder on what you're doing, so you gotta use the old solder sucker here, get it up. So what you do is you push down on this, all right, and then when you're ready to suck up the solder, you press the button and you put it down here where you want to suck up the solder from. So let's kind of see how that one goes in action here. I want to get the solder up from this one right here, okay? So I have the solder sucker ready to suck. Come over here. As soon as it liquefies, okay, make sure you're at a good angle. As soon as it liquefies, okay, I just hit the button and it sucks all the solder up for me. All right, sometimes you get too much solder on and it creates a dome, but actually zero connection there. So just a little bit of solder when you're doing these, all right? Just get the nice little Hershey Kiss scenario going on when we're putting them on here. All right, once you have all your chassis in place, it's time to put the chip in. If you notice down underneath, there's a notch on the board. You can kind of see the little black notch under there. The notch on your chip, okay, does matter which direction it goes. So in this case, on this particular board, all the little half moon notches need to go this direction towards the small guy over here. All right, then you need to maybe squeeze these in just a little bit, not too much, but make sure that you can get them aligned. All right, and then kind of stick them into place here. Make sure that they are going in evenly on each side. Okay, once you think that you have everything set up and ready to go, all right, nice and even, you'll be able to push them in. And just be gentle. You might take a couple tries and it's okay. Be patient. Don't force these. All right, because once you break these pins, okay, the chip is done and the chip is cached for, so we can no longer use it. So once it's in as such, then you can give it a good swift, like kind of shove in so that it sits and it's nice and flush. Do that with the same other two chips. Remember, the notch goes in this direction. All right, so all your chips should be now facing with the notch in that direction towards the resistors and diodes. All right, all three chips in, and this is the 555 timer. This is all in, and we'll be ready to test it. The one thing I didn't show you, you can bend these when you put in the plus and the minus. Bend them over and then go ahead and solder them as well. I forgot to show that before this, but now you've got your complete little basic solder kit put together, and you're ready to try it out and see what it does. All right, so now it's true test of time. We're going to connect our battery. All right, see if this thing actually works and does what it's supposed to do, or if we soldered everything in correctly. All right, and lo and behold, it's working correctly. We put everything in right. All our solder connections are bad. Now, if yours isn't working right, sometimes you might need to press down here. It's because you didn't get these through the hole good enough and the connection wasn't made good enough. But you know, you should be able to get it to do the oscillating lights like this if you've done it all correctly. So there's your first kit. We've got a couple more to do, especially your breadboard companion. That one's going to be very important for us. This is the only one I'm really going to show you how to solder in. The rest, hopefully we're good to go. If not, just ask me questions. We'll talk to you soon. See you in class.